As much as I've covered a lot of older AAA games on this channel, I really do have a soft spot in my heart for the underdogs. Over the last, I would say, 10 years, indie gaming has just exploded, not only in popularity, but also in quality. From the Stardew Valleys to the Hollow Knights, these teams have shown that good, long-lasting games can be developed with small dev teams and modest budgets. AAA games have become so bloated and so out of touch that the only games that are still making a return on their investments are the ever-running COD games, which is a topic I will leave for its own video because I have some thoughts about that. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about Alabaster Dawn, and man, this game is good. From the story, the gameplay, the music, everything that has this polish on it that just screams substance and style. AAA could never make something so creative and polished, even if they did throw $1 billion at it. The soul of Alabaster Dawn is so prevalent that I was hooked pretty much the second I started. Radical Fish Games knows how to draw you into the story that they wanted to create. Speaking of Radical Fish Games, I wanted to take a moment and point out that they are just a 15-person dev team to create something that not only runs beautifully, but is so creative and alive with a combat system that feels both retro and modern. I am convinced modern indie devs are using sorcery behind the scenes to accomplish such Herculean feats. Anyway, with all my gushing and glazing out of the way, let us open the book and begin our first chapter into Alabaster Dawn. Quick note before we begin. I already know what the comments are going to say about crosscode, and I should put. I will get around to it. I promise. I promise I will get around to playing it. I know that this is a spiritual successor. Also, if you guys like my videos, I would appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and helps keep the videos in the algorithm. All praise those algorithm gods. All right, we good? Okay. Before we get into the story, I just want to preface by saying this will be a very brief synopsis, as I don't want to spoil too much, and the game is in early access, so the story is, of course, tentative. With that out of the way, we begin with this. I wanted to point out that the sprite work in this game is incredible. I always found sprite work in these modern 2D pixelated games to be impressive, but especially so in Alabaster Dawn. While most games that have 2D sprites have this kind of static effect to them, characters making the same movements regardless of how tense the situation is, Alabaster Dawn has these one-use kind of customized movements during dialogues to accentuate certain topics or discussions. It adds quite a bit of flair to each character, as they don't just mundanely approach every conversation the same way. Anyway, not really integral to the story, but something I wanted to point out anyway. As the cutscene ends, we are given control of a group of heroes ripped straight out of a fantasy novel. This party is strong, with the first playable character, I think it's Damon, We're gonna go with Damon, being a powerhouse and the clear leader of this group. I had a feeling the game was gonna pull a bait and switch as Damon was just wiping the floor with everyone, indicating a clear intent that he is of a much higher level than any starting character. But moving from each era, the game offers a simple enough tutorial: parrying, blocking, dodging, the basics. Cutting through the fodder, we make our way to the boss of the area, or at least what I thought was a boss. But given the actual bosses you end up fighting later in the game, this is kind of a shrimp in comparison. But anyway, as you strike down the boss, this happens. This moment is bleak, and it really shows just how unprepared everyone was for the invasion of the Nyx. And as the screen fades and all hope seems lost, we are introduced to our true protagonist, Juno. Leaving the shelter, we find a light on the ground that transforms into a... Is that a capybara? Look at that guy! Oh, look at him! He's so cute! Anyway, sorry. Juno. For some reason, names him Cabbage, and then just look at him. Look at him. I love his design with the leaves acting like his ears and tail. He's just look at him. Cabbage is a divine spirit, which I guess is like a step down from a god, but anyway, he acts as our guide throughout the story. He's also kind of unsure as to why the gods abandon the heroes at their most critical moment, but he also informs us that the gods aren't really talking with him, and he's not sure why. This adds another layer of mystery to the story that isn't really explained in this early access part, so we're just kind of left to speculate. I feel like this is a good time to talk about the early access portion of this video, and I will go into it a little bit more later in the conclusion, but I feel like this is a good starting point. I understand why devs, especially indie ones, do early access periods. It's to gauge interest, receive feedback, and garner some capital for future development. However, I am just getting real sick of every game coming into early access and we have to wait on these bloated development times. If the rumors are true, Alabaster Dawn is going to be in development for another 2 to 3 years, which just seems way too long, especially for how little content there is for this initial release. If you play the story, and only the story, there's only about 10 hours of runtime here, which just feels short. I will say though, what is here is extremely polished. The game runs smooth, with no frame rate drops, and the systems that are put in place are well developed. But I ran into some interesting choices here that really kind of just left me puzzled. One, the map is severely underbaked. There are some areas that require you to kind of backtrack after receiving gear later down the road. However, there is no way to mark these places on the map, so when you do eventually come across the gear that you need, you could like go back to that area and not have to. Basically, what ended up happening was I would find a new piece of gear and I would just have to run through the maps. I'm like, oh, I know it was kind of here, but I don't remember exactly where. And it just felt, it just felt underbaked. I found this to be an interesting issue because Metroidvania has kind of solved this problem years ago. This could have been a simple solution of just allowing map markers. I know eventually you receive an item that points out where some of the secrets are on the map, but this brings me to my other gripe. Why are you putting items in the game that aren't even completed yet? When I picked up the treasure sense, which is like a compass in the game that essentially points out where treasures are on the map, I was pretty excited. No more running around aimlessly. Only to find out that when I open the artifacts page, there's a text blurb saying that it's not even implemented yet. Why is it even here then? I wish I could say this was the only time something like this happened. However, there was another instance pretty early on in the runtime that required me to solve a puzzle to be able to make it to the other side of this lake, only to be met by a blockade with an early access sign saying this area isn't finished yet. Again, why even give me access to the puzzle to reach this side of the water? It just feels like a tease, and not the enjoyable kind. The part about this that pissed me off the most was the Ronin's Inn side quest. The area looked really interesting and like a pretty engaging side quest. It should have been included in this early access iteration. I guess ultimately the point I'm trying to make is that this game wasn't really ready for an early access phase. Mechanics and gameplay are polished enough to a level that warrants it, but story-wise, especially for a game that relies pretty heavily on its narrative, it just needed some more time in the oven. Anyway, enough about that. Let's move on to gameplay. The gameplay of Alabaster Dawn is one of its strong hooks. This is a fun game to play, with slick combat, fun parrying mechanics, and well-implemented skills. I mean, I really love crossbows in any game, but the more arcadey style of this one feels really satisfying to use. I find that games can either go one of two ways when it comes to crossbows. One, you go hyper realistic and make them strong but slow to use, kind of like in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, or two, they just give you the blicky. The crossbow is easily my favorite weapon in Alabaster Dawn. Not only is its fire rate very generous, but when you unlock more abilities with it, it easily becomes the best damage dealer pound for pound. This is even further enhanced when you start equipping gems. I especially like the Gambler gem because when you do this move, every arrow gets a higher crit chance. Anyway, let's move on to some of the other weapons. When the game opens, you are given the main sword weapon of the game, which operates kind of like any other standard longsword. It's good, but not incredible. Fast, but not too fast. The power comes from, as mentioned previously with the crossbow, from unlocking its skills. And before we move on to skills, I just want to quickly mention the hammer, because I love me a good bonk weapon. I found the hammer to be really well balanced. In some games, big weapons can either be really great, balanced attack speeds with weighty damage, or really, really bad. That's my main gripe with some games like No Rest for the Wicked. The heavy weapons can feel just too slow. I know heavy weapons usually come with the cost of speed, but sometimes these weapons are far too slow to have an enjoyable experience. The Souls games have mastered that balance, and so did Alabaster Dawn. The hammer hits hard, it's weighty, and it's quick enough to fit in with the general speed of combat. One thing Alabaster Dawn does really well, that not a lot of games do, is kind of force you to switch between the weapon types. Enemies have resistances and weaknesses, both physical and elemental, and they play a big part for how damage is dealt. Sword does slashing, of course, and hammer does blunt, like any other game. However, hitting an enemy that is weak to slashing with the hammer not only diminishes the damage done, it drastically mitigates it. I know for some, that will feel like a draw, but I think it adds a layer of complexity not really showcased in other games enough. Another quick thing I wanted to mention before we move on to skills is the command menu. When you are fighting, exploring, whatever you're doing, you can hit the R key. I know I played it on mouse and keyboard. I don't know what it is on the controller, but it doesn't matter. The game will pause and allow you to look at enemy weaknesses. I really enjoyed this feature as it takes out pretty much all the guesswork. Instead of mindlessly switching between weapons until you find the right damage type, it allows the action to just kind of keep moving. This is important because, like I said before, the damage mitigation for mismatched types is quite dramatic. I mean, look at these numbers. On top of damage types, we have skills, which come in two flavors, combat arts and divine arts. Putting skills into weapons unlocks combat arts, which serve as a way to increase their functionality exponentially. That's kind of the loop though. Enemies have a stun meter above them that when filled opens them up to taking more damage. All weapons unlock some sort of art that kind of rapidly fills the stun gauge, and another one that usually does extra damage to stunned enemies. It really marries into this fluid combat system that rewards remembering to use certain skills at certain times. My neurons would just fire right when I would pull off the sword stab move and watch the stun gauge fill rapidly. Very nice. Divine arts, though, act as the game's kind of special magic moves. These moves change depending on what element and weapon you're using. Hitting shift normally uses the melee divine art. Ranged attacks have their own divine arts that can be activated by holding the range button and hitting shift. Simple enough. There are also defensive ones, but I only found kind of one, I think, throughout my playthrough, and is probably easily the best divine art in the game so far. It can parry any attack, even the ones that normally aren't parryable, and does a lot of stun damage. I found myself using this skill a lot, especially against bosses, especially since the parry for that skill is pretty generous. You know, I think it's like you can activate it, and even if you get it off within the same frame of like an enemy attacking, it usually hits, and it gives you, I think, like 1 or 2 seconds after even. So it's a very good skill. As we're talking about the parry system, I want to go into more depth about it. The parry feels quite fair in this game. It's not quite like Sekiro levels of precision, but it's also not super generous. Feels just right, which is a positive because you're going to be parrying a lot in this game. Maybe because I played on mouse and keyboard, but the parry did feel a little awkward, mainly because of the button placement. The default is E, which you would think makes sense because it's so close to the movement keys. The combat can get pretty hectic at times, and taking a finger off any of the movement keys to parry feels risky. Maybe that's the point, but I probably could have moved the key to somewhere else, but there was no real solution that felt any better. This may just be a game that feels more appropriate to play on controller, which I'm not opposed to, by the way. I'm not one of those PC players that thinks that every game is better on mouse and keyboard. I mean, look at the Souls games. I tried to play Elden Ring on mouse and keyboard when it launched, and that's a fucking joke. Terrible mouse and keyboard controls. I'm getting off topic here. What was I saying? Ah, yeah, the parry. Parrying enemies quickly fills their stun gauge, which opens them up to taking more damage. You can get away with just kind of dodging and using combos most of the time, but some enemies are resistant to all kinds of damage until you stun them, so parrying is the most efficient option. I'll be honest, I'm not the best parrier when it comes to games. It's the main reason why I couldn't finish Sekiro and why I mainly play heavy bonk characters in these kinds of games when I can, but the parry feels generous and quite satisfying enough in this that I had no problem with it. If anything, I enjoyed it, which is a glowing review as far as I'm concerned. Now that we've covered basically everything involved with combat, I wanted to talk about another strong point of this game, which is the exploration and puzzles. Alabaster Dawn's world is its strongest point, minus the map, of course. There are so many little chests strewn throughout the map that it never felt boring to explore. And there's so much verticality, which is so interesting for a 2D game. Running around and seeing a chest above me always sent me on these missions to try and find some way up there. I will admit, usually it's a lot simpler than I was making it, or it would require some tool that I didn't have yet, but the game doesn't let you know this up front. Well, the kata section kind of does, but besides that, you can usually find your way to a chest. It just requires finding the right sequences of ledges to jump to. I really enjoyed this part of the game, most of the time. I also really enjoyed the puzzles in Alabaster Dawn. Some of them in the beginning were a little too simple and too easy and require some tuning, I think, just maybe challenge the player a little bit more, but as you progress, the difficulty seems to ramp up on them. I never found one that I couldn't solve without much difficulty, which was a little disappointing, but to be fair, I enjoy puzzle solving as a hobby. The Aether puzzles I found to be enjoyable, but I won't go into too much detail about them because of spoilers. I will say this though, if you enjoy environmental puzzles in games, you will enjoy this part of Alabaster Dawn. It is enough to fire the neurons without feeling like it's impossible to figure out. Just have patience, and you'll connect the dots. Like I said before, I'm a little tired of things coming out in early access with plans for 2 to 3 year development cycle after the fact, but I will say this. What is here in Alabaster Dawn is very promising. I do hope the updates aren't so far and few in between, and that future content updates aren't sparse, like it just adding 5 more hours of content feels, I don't know, it just doesn't feel great. It feels like a disservice to narratives to play them in parts, but I understand the logistics behind it. It's a good way to gather feedback and fine-tune mechanics, but it's just frustrating, especially when the games are good. And if that's the gripe I have with Alabaster Dawn being in early access, then that's a good sign. I want to play more. I really, really do. The narrative is solid. I do hope they expand on different characters a little more as time moves forward, which I'm sure they will, but for what is here today, right now, it just feels a little lackluster. 10 hours of story content for a narrative-driven game feels small. I do appreciate them adding a roguelite system to occupy time, but once again, only having 3 levels to play feels inadequate. But for $25 and the potential I see, I know the payoff will be worth it in the end. There is a really great base here, even if it does feel lacking in content. With Subnautica 2 and this in early access, I am salivating for what is coming next. But like I said before, I would rather play a complete game than play one in parts. At least I don't have to pay for future content, which is a bonus. If you made it this far, my name is Patraxis, and I thank you for your time as we explore the potential of Alabaster Dawn. AAA gaming could never make something even with an ounce of passion and creativity that Alabaster Dawn has been able to do with just 10 hours of runtime. We are truly living in the renaissance of indie gaming, and I am fucking here for it. I would like to cover more indies in the future, so please like and subscribe and leave a comment to let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video. I am working on an Ask a Lad video next for all my Vinland Saga lovers out there. Thank you for your support on my Thorfinn video. It just passed 1,100 views, which is crazy for me. I know it's nothing, but for a small channel like mine, it's just wild to think. I mean, when I started making YouTube videos, I didn't think anybody would be watching them. So even the fact I've gotten this far is wild. So thank you. Go play Alabaster Dawn and support Radical Fish Games. Have a good day.